Hello and welcome to another episode of the Student Loan Planner Podcast. It's Travis Hornsby. Great to be joining you again. I will attempt to try to get out episodes with me recording more frequently because I've got childcare, knock on wood. We've been having a really rough year with kids getting sick, hospitalized, and just it's been a real rough period. But I think I've got some reliable childcare lined up finally, so hopefully you'll be hearing from me a little bit more frequently. Today we're going to talk about Biden's plan for free college for almost anyone that wants it. This is a little bit of a provocative title intentionally because this is not direct free college, free public college like he promised on the campaign trail, but the effects of this new IDR plan are going to be profound if people fully optimize for it. I thought it would be fun to talk about this, to talk about how you could potentially, if you have young children, how you might be able to send your kids to college for free with this. And then especially if you have kids in high school right now, you could do that. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I'm also going to talk about free college for, grad school or almost free college in grad school. So we'll talk about all kinds of ways to pay less on your loans, like on a go forward basis, because a lot of times we'll talk about it once you already have the loans. I thought it'd be kind of interesting to talk about just the wide ranging effects that this new IDR plan will have if it ends up happening. But first, we have not taken listener questions in quite a while. So I wanted to start the show off talking about some different topics that you guys are interested in. If you want to ask your own question to have it featured on the podcast, you can leave that at studentloanplanner.com/voicemail. So if you just type that into your browser, studentloanplanner.com/voicemail, it's going to take you to a spot where you can press the record button on your phone and just speak your question into that page. First, we're going to be hearing from Sylvia about some loans from a family member.
I just have a question regarding my daughter and son-in-law. They have or at least my son-in-law's mother took out a Parent Plus loan while he was in undergrad, and she does not have the ability to pay. So they're thinking of doing to consolidate it, keep it in her name, consolidate it and do the income contingent repayment plan, but I believe that's 20% of her discretionary income. I was wondering your thoughts I read online about some loophole that's called a double consolidation loophole, where I guess it would open up the other repayment plans to them so that they could potentially get maybe a 10% or 15% amount that they would have to pay on. Also, would that in any way invalidate the loan forgiveness that's kind of still up in the air? My daughter's in grad school for physical therapy, so she has a good chunk of loans. He's military, also has some undergraduate loans, and just graduated last year, so he has not started paying on his own loans. They didn't want to put those loans in his name just for credit purposes. I don't think they want to go the route of a private loan either. So if any of your thoughts on the different payment plans and what your thoughts are on that.
That's very much what we're going to talk about today. If you think about Parent Plus loans, they did not want them to be easy to pay back with an income-based plan. Why is that? Because most people that take them out are in their 50s and 60s are parents. And so when you retire, your income typically goes way down. That's what they were trying to prevent, was parents paying back their loans on an income-based plan when they don't have much of an income. That's why they specifically in the statute say that you cannot pay back your Parent Plus loans with anything but ICR, and you cannot pay back a consolidation of Parent Plus loans with anything but ICR. The loophole for this is double consolidation. Megan and our team has written an article. If you type in double consolidation loophole in Google, you'll see it. What this basically says is, because they say a consolidation of Parent Plus, what they did not say is a consolidation that paid off Parent Plus. So the reason why we know this is a thing is in the 2017 Prosper Act, the House GOP tried to repeal PSLF and cap borrowing and make income-based repayment very unattractive and rein in costs for the student loan program, and it failed. And in that bill, they specifically mentioned shutting this loophole down, which basically legitimized it. So the way you do this is you send two consolidations to two different servicers, and it depends. Sometimes it's better to do this if you have 25 loans. You might do the first consolidation online, and then you might do the second consolidation paper and then the third consolidation paper. If you've got like 4 loans like this person might have, then you probably would do the first 2 via paper and then the final one online. It's basically what is easiest for the individual situation. That's one method, right? Is to do this double consolidation. Now I'll say this. If you have 30,000 of Parent Plus loans, and if we're talking about somebody who's truly got almost no income, ICR will still probably result in an almost $0 a month payment, right? If somebody's living predominantly on Social Security income, on very low incomes, taxable incomes, that's not really taxable anyway. You might be able to just consolidate and put it on ICR, and then you're fine. And you don't have to worry about the fact that you're not getting to pay 10% of your income. But for people that want to take that extra step, doing the double consolidation, you can get access to the repay plan. Why is that important? Because repay is about to become a way bigger plan than it is now, because you'll be able to file taxes separately and you'll be able to have a 225% of the poverty line deduction. ICR is only 100%. So not only are we talking about, only taking 10% of your income instead of 20, we're also talking about taking that deduction for, a family up to maybe, off the top of my head, maybe 40,000 instead of 15,000 in terms of the deduction before they take anything. So remember that marginal tax rate is different from effective tax rate. Marginal tax rate is what is the tax rate on the next dollar of earnings, whereas effective tax rate is what is the taxes divided by your total income, and that's your effective rate. And so effective rate is frequently affected by things like deductions. So if you have a really big deduction, your effective rate might be very low. So for example, let's say that you have a $50,000 income, but you only pay 10% of everything above 40,000. So then you're only paying $1,000 of taxes divided by 50,000. It's a 2% effective rate, but your marginal rate is 10%. The same benefits are going to accrue to this double consolidation loophole situation, right? Where you're going to have people that are going to take their student loan effective rates down from maybe it's 15% or 20% with ICR because the deduction's so low. When you use double consolidation, you can take it down to almost nothing. So this is a really big deal. So for this person, if they don't have a very large income, what I would argue is this: if you can't afford our services, double consolidation loophole on Google, watch the YouTube video. You can do it. If you fail to do it, then you can go out and sign up for, like a community college program half-time and take out some student loans in your name. Make sure there's some unsubsidized loans in that mix, and then take the unsubsidized loan after you've already done the consolidation, and then consolidate that with the Parent Plus loan. And then now you'll have a consolidation loan that would be eligible for repay. So there's multiple different ways to skin the cat, so to speak, to get to this 10% of income plan. We're going to talk about that more later in the show. But first, another question.
Hey, Travis, thank you for all you do. The information you and your team provide to so many people is life-changing. I hope you have some advice for me. My question is about Parent Plus loans. I have about $200,000 in student loan debt, including Parent Plus loans and a little bit of grad school loans for me, but I can't afford the payment for those in a direct consolidation. I also can't afford the income-driven payment plans as they currently are because my husband and I make a little bit too much money. I'm an educator with 3 education jobs, so I would love to start PSLF, but I can't afford to consolidate or do any of the current income-driven repayment plans. And so my question is about the double consolidation. If the 5% income cap goes through, then it may benefit me to double consolidate. But I'm afraid to do that now because if for some reason it doesn't come through, I won't be able to afford the loans that I double consolidated or attempted to double consolidate. So what is your advice for someone like me? Should I go ahead and try to double consolidate now so I can get in on that possible 5%? But the risk is, what if it doesn't go through? Then I'm stuck with loan payments I can't afford, because right now, unfortunately, all I can afford to do is the extended graduated repayment plan, which means I will die with student loans. Thank you again for all you do.
Clearly, Parent Plus loans on the mind for folks. You've got to think about the fact that there's always risk in life. There's no such thing as zero risk. There's just high risk, medium risk, low risk, right? So a low risk way to handle this is to say, I am willing to use any and all methods to do what I need to do to take care of my family, right? That would be the mindset that I would suggest. And the way you could go about doing this is to say this: if the double consolidation loophole failed, then you just have to go out and take an unsubsidized loan somehow. There are a gazillion schools begging you to sign up for some post-bac program or master's program, and it may be useful, it might be useless. It doesn't matter. What you need is the student loan to mix in with your consolidated Parent Plus loans. So this is an example of a broken system. This system is a big mess. That's not your responsibility to fix it. Your responsibility is to your family and to not be stressed by this. And so if someone's an educator, they had that job for a long time, they might be able to consolidate and get the IDR waiver. So if you've been paying for 10 years, you might be able to get the whole thing forgiven from the IDR waiver completely, 100% gone, if you have 10 years of credit cumulatively after you consolidate. That might be one path to look into to apply for the IDR waiver before May 1st when that consolidation window is over. And then the other option I would maybe think about is, can you start the double consolidation process now? And if you do, could you maybe file taxes separately and get access to this new repay plan? And would that payment be pretty attractive? The other thing I would suggest too is don't be afraid of strategic forbearance. You can ask for up to 3 years of voluntary forbearance, citing economic hardship. And generally speaking, the loan servicers will give it to you and you get approved for it 12 months at a time. So if you need to pause payments, you can do so. And you could simply ask for a forbearance. Now, same story. If you need to defer your loans as long as possible before your income drops in retirement, you can also sign up to be a student again and take out a master's degree. This is a broken system, right? This is something that they shouldn't be able to let you borrow so much loans, and the schools are the ones that are benefiting, right? Because the schools couldn't charge $200,000 or even $100,000 if you have a lot of interest, if they didn't have access to unlimited capital provided to them from the government instead of just regulation from the government that caps tuition prices and gives grants that match tuition rates. But that's not the system we have. So I would just say to, yes, do the double consolidation and know that your backup plan is to go be a student again and to not be stressed out by that, because there's a lot of programs out there that would gladly sign you up for student loans in your own name that you can mix in with a consolidated Parent Plus loan. So let's just do just a bunch of questions and we're going to get into the bean of the episode, I promise.
Hey, Travis, sending you and your family good vibes. God bless. Wondering if any of this applies to private loans through Sallie Mae or Navient. I've done a consultation with your team and it's fantastic. So it's appreciated.
So what that listener, I think, meant by does this apply to Sallie Mae and Navient? Sallie Mae, the answer is no. That's almost always going to be a private loan. Navient sometimes, though, can be confusing because Navient has a lot of FFEL loans, which are commercially held. And those loans can be consolidated and get benefits from the federal system and IDR waiver, benefits. And the Sallie Mae private loans cannot. Sallie Mae loan would be like Signature Student or some sort of Sallie Mae trust kind of thing. In other words, if it shows up in the studentaid.gov website, it's going to be a commercially held FFEL loan. If it doesn't show up on that website, then it's going to be a truly private loan unless it's held from Department of Health. So Department of Health loans that are federal but look like private loans are things like health profession student loans, nursing loans, primary care loans, loans for disadvantaged students. Those loans typically have a 5% interest rate, and they're from programs offered by Department of Health, and they can be consolidated into qualifying loans on the federal student aid system if you know what you're doing. So let's keep up the questions.
Hi, Travis. I had a question about using accounts that gain interest and can be used in a tax-advantaged way for qualified education expenses. For example, 529 accounts, ESA accounts, I-bonds, EE bonds can be used for qualified education expenses tax-free. However, they can only be used in the year the education expenses occur, or I've seen some up to a max of $10,000 can be used to repay student loans. Is there any talk that you're aware of regarding changing those rules where for my children, I can let the interest grow for many years longer and use those for student loans in a year the education expenses were not occurring? That would be really interesting if some of those rules might change.
The reality is your 529 should probably be one of the last things you fund. And the reason is just that your kids can take out student loans. And ultimately, if we have an uber generous IDR system that allows for unlimited borrowing, 529 plans might be kind of irrelevant. So I think that in terms of using it for other things, like the listener mentioned the $10,000 cap. Yeah, there's some things you can do for 529s for sure. You can transfer beneficiaries as much as you want without any tax consequences. So you can open it up in a 529 for yourself. And then when you have a child that's born, you can change the beneficiary to that unborn child. That's what I did with our 529. And then you can move that money around, let it go tax deferred, use it for tuition and education expenses in the future. There are more flexibilities around some of these 529 accounts. Basically what's been happening the past few years is the 529 plan is something that I think from like a nonpartisan budget hawk kind of perspective, people don't like it because the vast majority of the benefits go to upper middle income folks from a tax perspective. And so there's not like huge bipartisan support for expanding a ton of benefits for 529 accounts from a tax perspective, but they keep growing incrementally. And the reason I think with that is just like everybody wants to push a little bit of something into these plans. And so you're seeing stuff for being able to pay for high school tuition expenses, right? And just like getting a little bit of room to put, transfer some 529 money to a Roth IRA. And like there's these like little things around the edges, none of which are really life changing in my opinion, that we just have to see if this continues to develop where you've got 529 accounts becoming as good as HSAs, for example. Oh, I'm not there yet. So that's why I don't talk about it a whole lot, because if somebody saves like a few $100 in taxes, wonderful. That's not life changing at all. You can only think about so many things. So is that worth taking up headspace with? In my opinion, not unless you're able to convert 529s to a Roth IRA in mid 5-figure amounts. You know what I mean? So that's kind of why I haven't gotten super excited about a lot of these like tax advantage education specific things. Certainly, if you do want your kids to be debt free, definitely put a lot of money into a 529. That's a valid thing to do. But I wouldn't worry about 529s from the perspective of these $10,000 amounts you can spend on student loan repayments and things like that quite yet.
Hi, my name is Leslie. Back in October, I had a meeting with Ben, one of the student planners, and I was advised about consolidating my Parent Plus loans and using that loophole method that you have, which I understand because I watched the videos and everything. But I was to start that process mid-December, late December. So with the pause, I was wondering if I should continue with that plan. Should I start the process of the parent consolidation loophole method now, or should I wait until it gets closer to we know when the payments are going to start again? And also if there is a chart that says like, this is your income, this is what your payment will be, because I know we also were advised about, filing our taxes, married filing separately. So I needed to know what that looks like if we choose to file separately, married filing separately, or if we choose to stay married in our taxes. My understanding is if I start the loophole method, the consolidation, that I'm no longer a part of the pause. Just want to know if I need to start the consolidation for the Parent Plus loans now or wait until it gets closer to when the pause is going to be lifted and the income guidelines of what my payment would be. Thanks so much.
We're clearly getting a lot of questions about Parent Plus loans. And these are questions that built up over the past little bit. So I apologize. Just wanted to make sure that I got a lot of these out of the way on today's show. So yes, continue with the double consolidation. So this pause is not going to stop when you do the consolidation. If you're consolidating federal loans into federal loans, pause continues until it ends. The reason you might not consolidate right now overall is because your payment might get reset to a higher amount. If you were benefiting from a prior low IDR payment, that payment might get kind of reset, and you might not benefit from that if the payment doesn't have to be recertified until 2024, 2025 even. In the case of people with Parent Plus loans, that's not really the case, right? Your payment on ICR is going to really stink whenever it starts. That's why you want to go ahead and do the double consolidation now for a couple of reasons. You could get the IDR waiver benefit if you do that double consolidation. You could get closer to the 20 years to 25 years of forgiveness. For Parent Plus loans, we're assuming it's going to be 25 years with the new plan. We don't know that yet. You definitely want to continue doing that. In terms of filing separately for taxes, I would do file separately for taxes unless the cost of doing so is absolutely huge. And the simple reason is because if you need to amend your tax return, you can, but you can't do the other way around. So if you file separate and then you need to amend to joint because you made the wrong decision, you can do that for a defined cost, whereas you can't do it the other way around where you're a joint and then you amend to separate. So I would say continue with that process for the double consolidation. Don't stop, keep it going. And don't be scared that you're going to lose the pause benefits if you consolidate. The only thing that might hurt you is having to recertify your income early, but Parent Plus borrowers don't really get affected by that.
Hey, Travis. My name is Jen, and I was wondering if you could do a show on the recent updates to the repay plan that are being evaluated by the public for the next 30 days. Specifically, if you could talk about married filing separately or married filing jointly. Myself and my husband got married in October, and if you want a specific example, I make 250 to 300,000 a year. He made about 50,000 and then was recently laid off. So he's actually at the $0 mark right now. And we are trying to determine whether or not we should file jointly or file separately. And I'm thinking with this new repay plan, it should be separate. I think a lot of people are out here wondering the same thing. So if you wouldn't mind doing a show on that, would love to hear your perspective. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
So we'll definitely do a lot of shows on this. We're trying to wait a little bit because we don't want to tell people confidently that it's definitely a certain way and then have them come up with slightly different rules at the very end of the negotiated rulemaking. But we do think that they're going to do married filing separate for this new plan. We do think they will. You have to plan on them doing that for how you're filing your taxes unless there's a big cost for doing so. So an example would be if your husband got laid off and it was recent, then he made income the majority of the year. Even if you're thinking about the fact that he's making zero income now, maybe he made a big income like for the majority of the year. And so it might still make sense to file taxes separately if the cost of doing so from an extra tax payment that you make is minimal. So what's minimal? I don't know, less than a couple $1,000s if you're filing separate. Now, if it's not minimal, like let's say that his income's moderate, your income's really large, then in that case, I'm a lot more of a fan of filing jointly for a couple reasons. One is if you file jointly with this new plan, you're going to be allowed to include your spouse and your family size. So your deduction would be based on a family size of you, your spouse, and your kids. Whereas if you file separately, it's just you and your kids. So they're kind of changing the rules a little bit, but with the higher deduction that they're giving on how you like figure out what that deduction is. I would say a lot of people need to file separately. I'm going to guess, this is just off the top of my head guessing, I'm going to guess that maybe double as many people need to file separately with this new rule as did before. And since most people will use their 2022 tax return to recertify their income when they do so for the first time in many years, you probably need to be paying attention to your 2022 taxes very carefully and closely, right? So that's just definitely something that I would be thinking about in terms of what that looks like for you. You know, that's why we do the student loan consult service. If you need a refresh because you're an existing client, you can also do that as well and hire us for a follow-up plan for that. So in terms of the new repay plan, we're coming up at the end of the comment period, or actually probably will be at the end of the comment period when this podcast gets released. And so that means they're going to come out with their IDR plan. It's real interesting to see what's going to happen with this. There was a pretty shocking number to me with the cancellation case before the Supreme Court, where only 120 Republicans in the House signed on for the letter opposing student loan cancellation. There's 218 to 220 Republicans in the House, something like that. So that tells you that like a solid 40 to 45% of the House Republicans did not want to sign on to that letter, which real fascinating. I hope Nate Silver does an analysis of that to say like how much of a R plus 10 to D plus 10 district, like what's the average threshold of like the partisan tilt of a district that signed on to that letter versus not signed on to that letter. That'd be really interesting to see that. My guess is that basically the House Republicans are kind of like opposed to student loan cancellation, but not that opposed, where they want to put their name on it, especially if they're in more moderate swing districts, or they represent a district that's highly educated, for example. So it's real fascinating, this whole politics of student loans. So let's take one more listener question, and then we'll get into the pod today.
Hey, Travis, love the podcast. Considering the new repay plan, I'm wondering what limits are, if any, on how generous they could make those repayment plans count for PSLF. Does the PSLF legislation really just say you need income-based repayment and then give total authority to the Secretary of Education to come up with the actual terms? That seems like an amazing loophole, so thanks.
I have to say, I laughed when I listened to this one because it's like, the Congress really screwed up. You know, the folks who made this rule, it was the 2007 era Congress with the George W. Bush White House that came up with these rules. And that was like the PSLF rules. The ICR statute that they based like pay, repay, all these like way more generous plans on, that was developed by like the Newt Gingrich era Congress, I think, like during the Clinton administration. Basically, Congress, and specifically like Republicans in Congress, are really bad at like being careful about how they write laws. Because, like giving total discretion to the Secretary of Education, like obviously, Republicans tend to be a little bit more not wanting to spend as much money on social programs. Democrats like to spend more money. And so if you make it so that people could just change the rules, pretty big loophole, right? We're estimating this new repay plan could literally cost the government over $1 trillion over the next 10 years because it's just that generous. If you look at what's going to happen for like physicians in residency, you could probably come up with ways to file separately for taxes or just certify your income at strategic times to get 0-month payments. And then this new repay plan is going to subsidize all of the interest instead of some of it, because repay subsidizes half and you can't file separate, right? So you kind of can't get that payment down super low if you're married. And then you also don't get a huge interest subsidy. If 50% of unpaid interest, well, that's helpful, but it's not so helpful that you might not just do pay, right? But with this new repay plan, getting your payment certified at the right time is going to be really critical. Residents could get zero interest pretty much for almost their entire residency or their entire fellowship. So there's that. And residency deferment now counts for PSLF. I mean, I'm talking just about physicians, but this new repay plan is a really freaking big deal. Will a Republican president roll back some of these regulations in the future? I think so. Who would do it? I don't necessarily think that President Trump would do it if he were to run in 2024, because he's a little bit more, frankly, doesn't mind social spending as much, right? Like he's more of like this populist style of a person. Like that's why he kind of just completely ignored student loans when he was in the White House. It was the House Republicans that came up with the Prosper Act that would have really gutted the income-driven repayment plans and PSLF. So that was really more of a like House Freedom Caucus driven kind of thing. But maybe a President DeSantis in 2024 might say, not only am I going to get rid of this new repay plan because Biden modified an existing plan, I can modify this plan to make it the same as ICR, right? I can just say that repay is going to be ICR, 20% of income, 100% of the poverty line deduction. And if you want a low payment, then you can sign up for the new IBR plan if you qualify, or the old IBR plan if you don't. No interest subsidies. He could easily do this now because Biden's opened the door for him doing so. Kind of like how Trump opened the door for Biden perma-pausing student loans by claiming the authority to do that and then making it look like, this is a bipartisan thing, that nobody can challenge. So I think that the Secretary of Education is really going extremely aggressive on this. He's not going as aggressive as he could, right? He could have done 400% of the poverty line like progressives wanted. He could have made it 5% of income for all degree types, graduate loans included. He didn't do that. He did 10 years instead of 10% instead of 5%. He could have done 20 years for forgiveness for grad loans instead of 25. They're at least right now saying that they're going to keep it at 25 for grad loans. So there's a whole lot of things that could happen as a result of this power long term. I'm definitely thinking that there's going to be just a bunch of lawsuits or a bunch of volatility in the regulations on this just because of the amazing benefits that you can deliver to voters with this loophole. We'll see. And with that, I want to say this. If you want to ask a question on the podcast, studentloanplanner.com/voicemail. And now we're going to get into the meat of today's show, which is talking about how Biden's got a plan for free public college and actually free college pretty much for almost anybody. And this is like way bigger than what he talked about in the campaign trail, right? Because he said he only wanted to do it if your income was below a certain level. I think it was $125,000. I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'd have to Google it. But it was basically like middle-class people shouldn't have to pay for public college. And this was something that he really absorbed from like the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren wing of the party, because he was trying to look for policy ideas. And that's kind of policy entrepreneurship, right? You sort of take what is getting good traction with other candidates and make it part of your own platform. If we think about this plan for I need to stop saying free public college. It's really free college, period. And here's how it works. You take out the max loans for Stafford loans for your own kid's name. So that's like $5,500 to $6,500 to $7,500 a year. And you're a dependent student, which means that your parent can take out Parent Plus loans. Now, how do most people screw this up? Most people use a combination of their personal savings, their home equity, and their maybe 529 plans and Parent Plus loans, and maybe even private loans to fund their kids' education. They also tend to take out loans in both parents' names. So this is very poor planning. And the reason it's poor planning is because if you take out all the loans in one parent's name, then you can make sure that you're paying only on that one parent's income by filing taxes separately, especially with this new repay plan allowing people to file taxes separately. So how is this going to work? Like, let's give an example. So let's say I'm going to have to pull out my calculator here. So let's say you've got a family that's got $200,000 of Parent Plus loans. And let's say their family size of 2, and let's say the person's making $70,000 a year. And let's say that just continues into retirement. Usually it wouldn't. Usually you would expect that income would fall a little bit. if I just sort of assume this person is got 70,000 of income, they would pay about $300 a month in their new repayment plan. That's really cheap if they're filing taxes separately. So think about that. You've got 70,000 of income, you've got 200,000 of Parent Plus loans. If you get that double consolidation loophole in place, you can pay about $300 a month. Now, do most people earn 70,000 a year in retirement times two? Heck no. Most people earn like 30, 40,000 in retirement, right? Most people make the majority of their income from Social Security. Social Security is not taxed until you make over, I think it's 25,000 of modified adjusted gross income as a single person. Maybe it's a little bit more if you're married. And so in other words, even if you're making a lot of money, Social Security is only taxed like 85% of it is taxable. So a lot of people, like probably 50,000 is probably more of a typical type of retirement income for folks. And if you're making 50,000 of income, your Parent Plus payment on new repay could be like 140 a month. So think about the logical conclusion. You've got people, you've got kids that are taking out like loans in their own name, 30,000 that they're going to pay 5% of income on. But if you're really careful about when you certify your income, the first 2 years, you can probably use your prior year tax return, right? So you probably have a $0 income as a student. So you pay $0 a month for the first year. And then you probably worked only like the last third of the year when you graduated. So you're probably paying almost $0 for the second year. And so let's say that you get married at 27 and you have kids, 1 or 2 kids after that, right? Your family size is large enough that even somebody with a modest income, like 70, 80,000 of income, or that's not that modest, it's like a decent income, right? You could probably pay almost nothing on that. So the kids, in many cases, could get loan forgiveness on their own 30,000. We're estimating about at least 75%, probably 80% of undergrads could get forgiveness in their loans now if they plan properly. And then on top of that, you've got mom or dad that if they take out Parent Plus loans exclusively, they don't take out a second mortgage, they don't take out private loans, they don't split the parents' loans across 2 people. They put it all in mom's name or dad's name or whatever. You only want to put it in one parent's name because of this filing taxes separately thing. Otherwise, you're going to be paying on both parents' incomes. So if you put it all in one parent's name, and let's say you borrow under that one parent across multiple children, now you can defer those loans as long as you've got a kid in school. So let's say you've got a family size of 5, you've got 3 kids you got to put through school. Let's say that the kids got a 5-year age difference from the youngest and the oldest, kind of like that. That was the way it was in my family. So you could send kid number 1 to school and start borrowing. Then kid number 2 goes to school, start borrowing. And then the final kid is done and you've borrowed for like 9 years. So like you almost have like maybe 10 years worth of borrowing. Now, how old would you be when the first kid goes to school? Maybe you're 50 or 55 probably is the most common age. So add 10 years to that, you're 60 to 65. If you're making some pretty solid income during those final years in your 60s, you could max out your 401k to put almost all your money away into retirement and do a voluntary forbearance on your loans for 3 years after graduation up to that amount. So you do that voluntary forbearance for as long as possible, and then you go into retirement. Now, the key here would be to optimize for ACA subsidies. So a lot of people don't know Affordable Care Act. You can pay almost nothing. You get your premiums 100% subsidized if you're about 150% of the poverty line for your income. And the only thing about that is you don't get those premium subsidies if you file separately. So there is a lot of planning involved, right? It's not something you can just do without thought. But you can structure things in such a way where you manage what your taxable income is between when you retire and age 70. Why age 70? Because at 70, you claim the maximum in Social Security, and that's going to be probably 2 or 3 times as much of a benefit as if you claimed it early. So then you basically have enough to live a decent life off of Social Security as long as a couple things are true. You've got a manageable housing payment, and you've got your optimized health insurance set up either through ACA or through Medicare with the Medigap plan. And then if you live until your 90s, you need nursing home care, then you're going to be using Medicaid for that. So if you wanted to provide an inheritance to your kids, what you'd need to do is work with an estate planning attorney, probably at least 5 years before you go into the nursing home, to put ownership of your assets into a trust so that that money is not owned in your name, and that basically those assets are not counted against you when you qualify for Medicaid. And that Medicaid benefit would pay for your nursing home because most middle-class families are not going to have saved for paying for long-term care of $100,000 a year expense. So this is the next level type of planning that is possible if you know what you're doing. the double consolidation loophole is not even that necessary. Like you could do ICR. That is in statute. You can't repeal that without 60 votes in the Senate. So I don't want to make people think that it's all dependent upon this new Biden IDR plan. It's not. But what is possible here is a family that does not have generational wealth, that wants their kids to be better off than them, that doesn't mind giving power of attorney over to their kids so that they can handle the IDR recertifications for them instead of having the kids have to pay them back. This is a tremendous loophole. This is the LeBron James of like financial aid loopholes, in my opinion. You can literally take out $1 million of Parent Plus loans. There's nothing stopping you from doing so. So if you have 5 kids and you've got 2 like educators in the family, right? You could even have like PSLF for that. You could work 10 years and then you're done. Or you could carry it around for 25 years with this theory that using this double consolidation, you're going to pay almost nothing on your, I'm going to say gazillion, but you could say $1 million of Parent Plus loans for 4 or 5 kids, right? To all go to like Ivy League schools. Now you might say, well, the Ivy League schools have financial aid that covers all the costs. Well, that might be so if your income is below a certain number. But let's say that it's not below a certain number. Let's say that you're making, $100,000 a year and your spouse is making $100,000 a year. You want them to go to a really top-notch school, but you don't have the money unless you take out a ton of debt or you mortgage your house. Let me tell you this, mortgaging your house to send your kids to school is one of the dumbest decisions you can possibly make. I don't mean that in a mean way. It would just be destructive to your finances. And I don't want that. I want what's best for your finances, right? I want you to have the most freedom and the most fun and the most happiness you possibly can on this earth by smart planning around how you make your decisions financially. And when it comes to student loans, there's all these loopholes, right? And you might say, this is wrong. This is immoral. I think life is too short to worry about what's moral and immoral when it comes to fiscal policy. I mean, I would just say that I take some tax breaks that are legal according to my CPA, but they're really dumb. Like they really shouldn't exist, but we take them anyway. And why? Because that's what the law says. That I didn't write the law. There's a difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance. Tax avoidance is legally looking at the tax code and trying to minimize your legal tax bill. Tax evasion is lying and trying to hide income and trying to avoid paying taxes you're supposed to pay. So this is what I would view smart planning as for college using some of these loopholes, is it's the difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance. Now, if you feel guilty about tax avoidance, about legally paying less in taxes, then by all means, go pay full price and pay cash and script and save and make all the sacrifices that you need to make, and then be unhappy about it when people take advantage of this stuff that, these loopholes that kind of are weird and probably shouldn't exist, but they do exist. So that's why I've tried to structure, I'm not perfect at it, but I've tried to structure Student Loan Planner as saying, these are the rules that exist. We don't try to take a moral judgment as to whether or not this should be the case, other than just acknowledging that, it kind of is dumb to give like a blank check to colleges, like to charge anything they want to charge up to the cost of attendance and having no regulation on those colleges. It seems like that's not the best way to do it. Instead of like thinking about why this is so messed up, we're just going to say, you know what, this is the rule. And you deserve to take advantage of it every bit as much as Jeff Bezos is going to take advantage of not having to pay taxes on unrealized capital gains. That costs the government a lot more money than you taking advantage of Parent Plus borrowing strategies. So if this new repay rule changes, the old repay rules still exist and they're still really advantageous for people doing this. So I think if more people knew about this Parent Plus loophole, I think we would see an explosion of borrowing. I think we would see an explosion of lower wealth families providing a upfront inheritance for their children of an exceptional education with very low debt that they have to worry about. And I think if you think about doing this for lower income families, historically marginalized communities, disadvantaged groups, right? I think that would be transformational for our country if that happened, where people are taking the loopholes available to them and providing an almost debt-free, education. Like let's think about like a USC or a Georgetown. Is that worth $300,000? I don't know. But what you could do is if you do this Parent Plus strategy, you could send all 3 of your kids to Georgetown and they would each have $30,000 of loans in their own name that they could just pay back through this forgiveness method. Or if $30,000 of loans is pretty easy to pay back if you've got a good education from a top-notch school, right? And then you would have a gazillion dollars of Parent Plus loans. If you're just having to pay a percent of your income, if you fully optimize that, it's not as big of a deal as it sounds. You might say, I'm going to die with these debts. Well, you know what? I'm going to die paying taxes. Did you ever think about that? I'm literally going to die and somebody in my family is going to have to worry about filing my final tax return, and they're going to have to write a check to the government for what is owed. I went through this with my grandfather. My grandfather, he died. I had to help my mom figure out his final tax return and figure out how to best claim my grandmother on the tax return because she was legally blind, and so she couldn't even do her taxes. And they were in their 90s. So it's like, yeah, literally if you make it to your 90s, you're still going to have to deal with answering the IRS and help. You're going to have to hire somebody to do it for you if you can't do it yourself. If you're not mentally capable of doing it because you're at that point, maybe you're 90 something years old, maybe you don't have your faculties anymore, somebody in your family is going to have to help you with it. So this is no different than income taxes. Is it something that you would want to deal with? Well, of course not. But bills don't stop just because you're in your 90s. But you still have got to pay your gas bill, still got to pay your electric, still got to pay your Medigap policy, right? Your Medicare Advantage plan. You still got to pay those bills. So this is just an extra bill that if you plan for it can be transformational for your family. Again, think about it like this. If you're paying 10% of what you borrowed for all of your kids to get a top-notch education, is that not worth a little bit of pain and suffering along the way to figure out the best way to handle it? People spend countless hours trying to think about scholarships and, financial aid and grants and subsidized loans and all these different things. What if you don't need any of that? What if you literally just say, back the truck up, put up the max on my loans? That's literally what the option is here. So we will see over time, will more people take out more debt? I'm really fascinated to find out the answer to this, because if people do, the government's going to have to come in very quickly and regulate this space, and specifically to block the schools from raising tuition to astronomical prices. But ultimately, the entitlement burden of student loans is a fraction of what it is for other programs like Medicare, Medicaid, defense spending, all those things, right? So that's why student loan debt is probably an entitlement that's going to grow, whereas some of these other things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid are so large that you probably have to do something about those first before worrying about the amount of extra debt you're adding to the national deficit with student loan policy. So really interesting space. I hope you enjoyed today's show. We expect that we're going to get extremely busy in March and April for the IDR waiver. So if you could potentially benefit at all from the IDR waiver, I'm begging you to book a call in March or April, because we will not be able to help you in May for IDR waiver cases. What does that mean? So by May 1st, you're going to get shut off from consolidating your loans and getting credit, more credit on the consolidated loan from doing so. The Department of Education has been dragging their feet on getting the FAQ out for the IDR waiver, but in most cases, it's almost always worth it to consolidate and just take the risk. In most cases, not all, but almost all, for people that could benefit from the IDR waiver. For Parent Plus borrowers, it's generally better not to worry about it. Just continue business as usual to try to get the double consolidation, because your payments are probably going to be really low anyway. But I am definitely begging folks that borrowed, especially borrowed before 2010, get a plan from us if you haven't already in March or April, so we can help you with the IDR waiver before that benefit is cut off May 1st. And then probably what's going to happen is May 1st, June, July, we're going to be dealing with getting ready for payments to restart, because probably the Supreme Court case is going to go against the administration. They probably will have this new repay plan ready to go by July, which I think they intended all along, because I think they expect to lose. That's why they focused so much on getting this new IDR regulation out early. And they're trying to have it ready to go when payments potentially restart. I would expect a Supreme Court case announcement probably by like maybe May, maybe early June, and payments are supposed to start 60 days after that. That would mean payment restart sometime like possibly the end of July, possibly the end of August is most likely. So in terms of planning for getting help that you need, if you're an existing client that's got a plan from us, make sure you book a plan. It's the same link for both now, studentloanplanner.com/book. So whether you need a new client appointment to look over the new IDR waiver kind of stuff and the new IDR plan, or you're an existing client that wants to look at the new IDR plan compared to what you're currently doing, definitely get a plan for that, because like I said, I'm expecting we're going to have very little capacity as we get closer to the end of the IDR waiver, just as we had zero capacity when we got close to the end of the PSLF waiver. And I want to make sure that any actions you need to take get fully implemented before then. So that's all, folks, that I've got for you on today's podcast. If you have any questions, obviously, just reach out. And thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Student Loan Planner Podcast.